how are people best handling reservation, redundancy, and quick restorations of images to cloud instances to ensure the kind of availability they need of performance machines and closest data center access for their on-demand use live streaming cloud production? So basically, how do you make sure you have access to your cloud all the time? How do you make sure that the data center is working the way that you want it to work? I know that you at Signiant deal with a lot of file transfers. Is that a question you want to tackle there, Rick?
Sure. I'll take a first stab and hand over to Richard. I think first and foremost, of course, you end up with kind of network discussions there. If you don't have network, then you don't have access. So that's kind of baseline. But we deal with a lot of duplication from a good standpoint and from a bad standpoint. I think just backup, multi-tiered database structure, tiered storage, rule sets, and automation. So I think we see a lot of, definitely, as some of the team mentioned here, redundancy is in the forefront of everyone's mind. So I don't honestly see a whole lot of trouble in terms of making sure that there's copies and backup. Making sure that those are accessible and easy to find is kind of a much bigger challenge. I think we see a lot of, and this is a big challenge in the cloud space as well, because there's a significant, or can be significant, cost element to storing stuff that maybe you needed for quick redundancy but no longer need. And so I think the creation and insurance that exists is probably pretty well understood and documented, and then the cleanup and archiving of what actually is needed and restorable at a reasonable timeline is where the complexity comes in. So great, you can send stuff to Glacier, but then you need to get it back from Glacier, and how long does that take? And the Amazon's done a pretty good job, as well as the other cloud providers, in providing a lot of different tiering to try to hit exactly the use case that you're looking for. But from a Signiant perspective, that's why we try to provide a completely storage agnostic fabric. So if it's on-prem, it's in the cloud, it's in Glacier, we can provide a way to access that. And then it's really all around automation and workflow of how quickly might you need it back, if you need it back, and then that'll kind of dictate where it goes. But I'll hand over to Richard.
Yeah, Richard is Director of Customer Success. Do you get more panic calls on average from cloud customers or on-premise customers?
Actually, I'd say probably more panic calls from on-prem.
Really?
I think initially it was more from cloud, but I think that actually has changed a fair bit. Cloud, I think there's sort of two parts to the answer here. One is very much like if you want some extra redundancy, if you want to make sure nothing's going to interfere with your particular processes, there are options in the cloud. You can do reserved instances. You can spin up 2 instances so you have a hot backup available. There are things like that it's basically just very, again, it goes back to a bit of that discussion of budgeting. It's just is this a high caliber enough event that I'm willing to spend enough extra money to keep a second encoder instance running or something like that? So for live production, you just factor that redundancy directly into your budget. So I think a lot of that is very clear cut, and I think as people have realized that and been willing to just set up that second encoder or whatever, we've seen a lot of those sort of instances calm down. The other part of it, though, is also working in environments, and whether you're building your own sort of controllers or if you're working with a vendor who's building it for you, is to for things that aren't necessarily totally in that live environment. This goes to some of what Rick was saying. Things about like if how do I maintain sort of continuity should I have some problem? In a large fan out transcoding environment, you're trying to transcode 300 files at the same time. If 2 of those fail and die, what happens? Okay, the orchestration layer should auto retry those. So those things just need to be accounted into the platform that's driving a lot of these operations. Same thing, if you try to access a piece of media and in one location it's bad, but there's a redundant copy maybe in another bucket that's in Glacier. Cool, let's go ahead and execute a restore command from Glacier, get that file, use it for the transcode. So that would have to be a relational link within your media management to know that there's that backup copy in Glacier. So it's just a lot of that, making sure that the platform level has the awareness to control and restart, look for secondary backup copies and those kinds of things. In terms of, I know part of the question too was also a bit about like the idea of like quick restoration of images and things like that. So if you are using particularly sort of infrastructure as a service, leveraging whatever cloud environment you're in, leveraging, what they support in terms of, scripting or redundancy controls. So whether or not it's firing off a Terraform to spin up 4 nodes for you or something like that. It's being aware of what's available that can do those kinds of things for you quickly and efficiently. So, we're not, people talk a lot of traditionally on-prem disaster recovery, the idea of where do I go to spin up a whole new place. And then also business continuity, which is how do I just keep operating, and they're hand in hand, but they're very different. Cloud's interesting because if you want it, continuity is a little bit easier, but you do have to pay for it. You're not getting away from paying for anything, obviously. But in cloud, it is a little bit easier because you can, like I said, if you want to have a second version of an encoder spun up, cool, just spin up 2 instances instead of 1. If you want to make sure that nothing interferes with your transcode operation, make sure you do an on-demand instance instead of a spot. There's choices you can make if it's worth the money. So I think cloud does open up a lot of really interesting things with that, but it does interestingly loop back to that budgeting discussion very quickly.
Well, it reaches back to a larger discussion that we haven't really talked on, is the operational aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like you could spin up, like as an example, I've got 120 different MCR kind of configurations in our cloud infrastructure across 5 regions in AWS. So for us, it's really like being able to provide both business continuity, but also the operators need to know, like, from their day-to-day workload or week-to-week workload, what nodes they're going to be actually on, what compute they're going to be on, and keep it all kind of in sync, right? Whether it's updated slates or bugs that need to be for that particular broadcast, making sure that kind of the fleet management, if you will, like in a hardware-based environment, is very easy. I only have so many finite spaces in my rack for hardware. In cloud, now I've got 5 different regions that need the same kind of update and kind of care and feeding, so to speak.